to antibodies. But that's the only way that we know to measure whether or not a vaccine is effective. Not how many people don't get the disease who've been vaccinated, but how many people who get the vaccine have developed antibodies afterwards. And we've known since the 1930s that antibodies don't equal immunity. You can have very, very high levels of antibodies and still get the disease that you're supposedly immune to, and have absolutely no measurable antibodies, have live virus or bacteria in your body and have no symptoms. Because the antibodies are only one very small part of the immune system. And I love this quote because this is actually from a medical textbook. Many vaccines stimulate immunologic memory but do not block infection. So in other words, you can be vaccinated, have antibodies, still get the disease, not only get the disease, but pass the disease on to others. So vaccines do absolutely nothing to reduce the rate of infection or to reduce the spread of infection. The two things that we're told they're specifically supposed to do, they don't do. And I think that if parents knew this, they would certainly think twice about vaccinating. And when we weigh up the benefits versus the risks of vaccination, the benefit we're told is that our children will become immune to the disease. So, you know, if you're worried about whooping cough, if you're worried about polio, take the vaccine and you'll be immune to it. And we know, science knows that that is not the case. You are not made immune by a vaccination. The only way to become immune is to develop the disease and develop natural immunity. And that's the only way to get immunity. So I think this is a really important thing, because if we're weighing up the benefits versus the risks and we're told that there is no benefit, then what's the point of taking the risk?
Why do you think? I'm just kind of curious. Is everyone been bamboozled? You know, I know is it the same in Australia than in the States, where, you know, the pediatricians believe this is gospel, you know, which means you take it on faith. You said it just absolutely perfectly, you know. Why do you think so? You have any thoughts?
Well, pediatricians, and in Australia, just as in the United States, and you'd probably know this because you went to medical school, but the medical curriculum is actually written by pharmaceutical companies. And the AMA, the Australian Medical Association, and the American Medical Association get an awful lot of support from pharmaceutical companies. So the curriculum, everything that is in medical education is written by pharmaceutical companies. So unless a doctor chooses to look outside of what they're taught, they won't really know. So I really think that most pediatricians care deeply about the people that they treat. But they don't know any better. And I say this all the time. Any parent who's read a book and a few articles about vaccination will know more about the subject than the average pediatrician. And not only will they know more than a pediatrician, they will know more than the most immunologists, because immunology education is shockingly bad in most medical schools. So yeah, there's a big gap in knowledge. In Australia, what we have, and it's the same thing they have in the UK, which is incredibly unethical, is that doctors are paid a bonus, or a bounty as I prefer to call it, to vaccinate your children. And they lose money if you don't vaccinate. In Australia, if a child is vaccinated according to schedule within 1 month of when the vaccine is due, they get $18.50 on top of the $21.50 that the government pays them for Medicare. So if you go to visit a doctor with your child, the doctor will get $21.50. If your child is vaccinated within 1 month of when the vaccine is due, they get an additional $18.50, so almost doubling the cost of that visit. Then, if they report that your child was vaccinated to the Australian Childhood Immunization Register, which is a national database that tracks who's vaccinated and who's not, they will get $6. And then at the end of the year, if 90% of the children in their practice are fully vaccinated according to schedule, they'll get a bulk payment from the government that can be tens of thousands of dollars. They lose that if they don't reach that 90% mark. And we have a lot of families who have family physicians that they've been seeing for their generation and from their parents' generation, who are now saying, don't bring your children to me because you are making me lose money. and this is incredibly unethical. No doctor should have a vested interest in a procedure, a medical procedure that they're recommending because they're supposed to think it's good for your child. There should be no money changing hands with that. I think anyone can see that. And this is the situation in Australia. I don't think you have that in the U.S. But
Oh
it's in
no,
Australia.
wait a minute. It's here also.
Is it?
Yeah,
Oh.
I can tell you that I'm the I'm very active in the Blue Cross HMO alternative group here in Chicago, and we have a little over 1,000 people who are participating, and they give you one of the bonuses that's given. Bonus, I hate that word also, is if your practice is exactly 90% or more are vaccinated. And I have fought with them endlessly, saying that if the family has a valid waiver, how could you count that against us? They said, Dr. Einstein, every one of your families has a valid waiver, and so we are required to hand in the waiver, but it doesn't make a difference. We're still, penalized because of that, it's slipping in also, but I can tell you something just fascinating, which makes me think that things are going to change. When I was at the Blue Cross meeting about 2 years ago, they were looking at why our practice had such a low incidence of asthma. The average rate of asthma in the HMO here in Illinois was about 12% in children. And they had a very good definition of asthma. It was 2 emergency room visits or 1 hospitalization. And so you can't fudge on it as such. And we had 1 case out of 1,000 children, and they said to me, "Why is that?" And I said, "Well, because we're great doctors, And they says, "Come on, Dr. Eisenstein, we know the truth. This was scary, Meryl. This was really scary. It's because you don't vaccinate, isn't it? How frightening is that?" It's
They
more
said that.
Yeah, they said that, and I thought it would be an issue that they wouldn't want us to be part of the program if we offered families choice. They were very happy to be, it's very scary.
It's criminal. It's more than scary. It really is criminal because, children die from asthma, adults die from asthma, and if we know that vaccines are causing asthma, and honestly we know it because so many scientific studies have shown such a strong link between vaccinations and asthma, vaccinations and every form of allergy. And if we continue to allow this to happen, and by we I mean the medical community, the mainstream medical community, and the government, then we are allowing people to die from something that's totally preventable, and that is criminal. I really think that that is incredibly criminal, and it shouldn't be allowed to take place. It's wrong. And that quote is just incredible too. That's amazing. Yeah, so I'm sorry, were you asking me something else that I was supposed to answer?
Perfect. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're perfect.
Okay, no worries. I did want to mention that I know that vaccination is compulsory in the United States for education and that there are exemptions available in every state, but they're not always that easy to get. Here in Australia, we don't yet have compulsory vaccination, but the government is planning on bringing it in, and I do believe that this whole swine flu episode is one of the ways in which vaccination will be made compulsory, not only for children but for adults as well. And it's one of the reasons why we have asked everyone to become active in fighting against this, because the swine flu vaccine is probably the most frightening vaccine after the Gardasil and Cervarix vaccine, the 2 vaccines for cervical cancer. It is totally untested, using an adjuvant, which is a substance, a chemical substance that's added to induce a reaction. That's what it's there for. It's to make a reaction so they can use less of the virus or bacteria and still get the same number of antibodies developed after the vaccine is administered. And all of this has been grandfathered in. It's not even being tested. Not that vaccines ever really get scientifically tested, but they're not even making a show of testing this. And in Australia, the government has pre-ordered enough vaccine for every man, woman, and child. And I don't believe that they would be doing this if they weren't planning on making it compulsory, because it's costing hundreds of millions of dollars. And from what I understand, the U.S. is doing very much the same thing. They've ordered over 300 million doses, I think, of the vaccine. And I think that this is something that everybody needs to be aware of, that in 1978, vaccination became compulsory in the U.S., and once it becomes compulsory, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. And if it becomes compulsory for adults as well, it's going to be the same situation, and we are going to see death rates and adverse reaction rates that will make the deaths and adverse reactions in 1976 from the swine flu vaccine look like nothing, look like child's play. So I really think that people need to become active. It's not enough to know. You have to actually do something about it. It's part of our responsibility as citizens of a democracy to actually take action against these sorts of attempts to get rid of our rights, to make our own decision. Okay, off my soapbox.
No. That's the most important. And I want you to also talk tonight a little bit about what we can do as an activist, because one of the typical is the families that don't vaccinate, the ones who've gone to the libraries, gone to the internet. They're not typically ones who go out and march, we're and so I think this is kind of important, to talk.
Yes.
What you're saying is exceptionally important.
Yes, and I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I mean, I'm 51 years old now, and I grew up during the Vietnam War, the very end of the Vietnam War, and I grew up with this attitude that if something wasn't right, I had to do something to change it. And I did march in anti-war, I guess, protests, and I did work politically behind the scenes to try and make sure that legislation could be passed that would protect rights. I mean, I really think it's important that, we're very lucky, very blessed to live in a democracy, and it's not just a matter of luck, it's a matter of responsibility as well. So I think that in the United States, as in Australia, we do need to take action, and part of that action means writing letters to our elected representatives to say, here is some information on this situation. Are you aware of this? Are you aware that I will not vote for you if you allow compulsory vaccination to come in for adults? There is a fantastic new website that just started out. It's called Pandemic Flu. Oh gosh, I've just totally forgotten it. I think it's pandemicflu.com.
Yeah, Karen will find it and put it up and send it to everyone.
And they have facsimile letters and flyers that people can print out and distribute. They can send them to their politicians, send them to Barack Obama, to his health secretary, to all the different people that you can possibly think of in the government that could take action on this, both on the local level, because in the United States, vaccination health policy is state. It's not federal. In Australia, a lot of it is federal. So, send this to all of your elected representatives. Send it to your school, the schools that your children go to. Send it to your employer. Send it to all your friends and family. Send it to your doctor. Send it to your naturopath, homeopath, chiropractor. Make sure that everyone you know is informed about this issue, because if we work on the grassroots level and actually inform everyone, and this information is verifiable. If you look at that Pandemic Flu online, you will find a million references to everything that is said, and they're medical journal references, so they can't really be argued with. If we make sure that we educate people, and that's the most important job of an activist on this issue, is to educate people, then the problem is half solved right away, because the education is so important. Fear is why these vaccination campaigns are effective, and the only way to fight fear is with information, with education. So if we take our roles really seriously as advocates for our children to make sure that their health is protected, and as activists in our community to make sure that our rights as Americans, as Australians, as people living in a free society are also protected, then this situation will be solved. And that's the only way that it's going to be solved. The media is not going to do it. The biggest purchasers of advertising in the developed world are pharmaceutical and chemical companies, and in the majority, the media will not cover this issue fairly. They are very biased towards whoever buys the most advertising. So the media is not going to do it. The mainstream medical community is certainly not going to do it because they believe that what they're doing is right, and they're also getting paid to believe that. The government